Hi, YouTube. I thought that I would make a Lyme disease video at 3 in the morning because, as usual, I can't sleep, and I was inspired by Jacqueline's video to make one of my own. So, my name is Heather, and I am 27 years old, and I have Lyme disease, and May is Lyme Disease Awareness Month, and so I thought that I would make this video in honor of that and in honor of everyone who struggles with this illness. I have had Lyme, I believe, since I was a very small child, judging by my symptom history throughout my life. And I lived with non-specific symptoms, you know, most of my childhood and teenage years and into my early 20s. And I grew up thinking I was a hypochondriac because my mother told me I was, and every doctor I saw told me I was. And so I just sort of accepted that I didn't feel right, and that was just how I was, and it was probably in my head, which in retrospect is really sad to me. But I was functional. I wasn't extremely sick or debilitated until my 24th year, and that was a really hard year for me. And the stress of that year, I think, brought out my symptoms, and it's slowly at first, and then the decline was very rapid and very frightening. I started to get really sick, and I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, and by fall of, I guess it was 2004, it was obvious that I couldn't take care of myself any longer. I couldn't take care of my cats. I could barely get out of bed to take a shower. I didn't know what was happening to me. I went to a few doctors out in Portland, a urologist, I think, and a gastroenterologist, and they really had no idea what was going on with me. So I decided that I had to move home to Minnesota because I just, like I said, I couldn't take care of myself anymore. And by that point, I guess it was December of 2004, and I knew that there was something physically wrong with me, something very wrong, and eventually I figured out that I had Lyme disease. None of the doctors I saw could figure it out, so I put my symptoms into Google, actually, and Lyme disease was the first thing that came up, and I read about it, and it fit, and I knew in my heart and my gut that this is what I had. So I went home and I told my mother, you know, this is what's going on. I have Lyme disease. I need to get tested. I need to see a specialist. And of course, she didn't believe me. And she took me to a couple of her doctors, and my father took me to his neurologist, and they all said I was fine, even though by this point I had declined really intensely and was completely bedridden, could barely eat, was like 85 pounds, couldn't think. My cognitive symptoms were by far the most debilitating and really what kept me bedridden. My brain felt like it was stuffed with cement or styrofoam 24/7, and I just could not think, and I could not read or write. It was terrifying and devastating to me. I could barely watch a half-hour television sitcom and comprehend it. And I was having panic attacks 24/7. My stomach was a mess. My bladder was a mess. I was having all sorts of migrating pain and neuropathy, and I would fall randomly and my legs would give out on me and I would be on the floor. My hair was falling out in clumps. I was just so sick, and no one believed me. Finally, I got my family practitioner to order a test for my genetics. I think she did it just to appease me. and the test came back positive for Lyme. IGeneX is a lab in California that specializes in Lyme. And so she offered me 21 days of doxycycline, and I declined because I was in the process of making an appointment with a Lyme specialist, an LLMD. And the closest one to Minnesota at the time was in Missouri, and I had no idea how I was going to make it up to Missouri when I could not leave the house. I could barely get out of bed, and my family, was obviously not going to accompany me. But somehow I was determined to do it, and I enlisted my best friend to come with me, and we had it planned out. But it never ended up happening because my family had me committed to a psych ward, I think a day before my appointment or something, or 2 days before my appointment. So this was early February of 2005, and the psychiatrists there diagnosed me with somatic delusional disorder and did not care about my positive IGeneX test. They got their infectious disease doctor to examine me for all of 5 minutes, draw my blood, send it to the local lab, which of course came back negative because Lyme tests are horribly inaccurate and false negatives abound. And so the infectious disease specialist declared that I didn't have Lyme and that I was crazy. So I got put on a lot of antipsychotics, and I almost was forced into electroshock therapy, but thankfully at the last minute wasn't. But the court did commit me to 5 months in the institution, and I got transferred to the state hospital, and I was so sick, and it was so scary. I thought I was going to die in there. I felt like I was dying. Every single moment that I was awake was excruciating. My only respite was sleep, and I could barely sleep anyway. It felt like my whole body was being poisoned, and it was so terrifying, and I couldn't lift my head. I couldn't sit up to hold a conversation. I spent the entire time in bed, and of course they thought that was because I was depressed, but of course I was depressed, but it was because I was sick. I was too sick to get out of bed. Finally, in June, the last psychiatrist they transferred me to, by some miracle, believed that I was ill, and he let me go. And that's the only reason that I got out of there. I'm still convinced to this day. So I started Lyme treatment, and locally I found somebody in Wisconsin, and I got better. And the brain fog began to lift. I could read again, and it was a miracle when I started to get my brain back. I was so happy. I can't describe it. And eventually I was well enough, or I felt well enough, to move to the East Coast, which is where most of my friends are and is where I went to college. So I moved back here and was pretty much okay for a year and a half. And I think that my video is over. Hold on.